1963, North Vietnamese forces launch a surprise attack against American Allied forces. This is the Tet Offensive. The North Vietnamese threw 85,000 troops at over 125 targets that day, catching America and the Allies completely by surprise. Here's the amazing thing. The United States repelled every single attack, every single one. Most of the major fighting had ceased after about a week. Way went on for about a month, but most of the major fighting ceased after about a week, after which the United States had lost fewer than 1,000 troops from the Tet Offensive. The North Vietnamese lost 35,000 out of the 85,000 troops that they attacked with. If we look at the Vietnam War as a whole, America actually won most of the major battles it fought. And over the course of those 10 years, we lost 58,000 troops. The North Vietnamese lost over 3 million people, which raises a very interesting question. How do you win all the battles, decimate your enemy, and lose the war? As it turns out, there are other definitions of winning and losing that we don't fully understand. In 1986, a philosopher by the name of James Carse wrote about two kinds of games, finite games and infinite games. He said if you have at least one competitor a game exists, and there are these two games. A finite game is defined as known players, fixed rules, and an agreed upon objective. Baseball, football. There's always a beginning, middle, and end, and if there's a winner, there has to be a loser. Then you have infinite games. Infinite games are defined as known and unknown players. The rules are changeable, which means you can play however you want, and the objective is to perpetuate the game, to stay in the game as long as possible. And because there's no such thing as winning in an infinite game, because there's no finish line, what happens is you play until you run out of the will or resources, and then you drop out of the game. And this is what happened to the United States in Vietnam. It's that we were fighting with the wrong mindset for the game that we were in. We were fighting to win, and the North Vietnamese were fighting for their lives. And both sides made very different strategic choices accordingly. It's not so much that we lost the war, it's that we ran out of the will and the resources to stay in the game, and we dropped out of the game. This whole definition of the infinite game got me thinking. We are players in infinite games every day of our lives. There's no such thing as being number one in your marriage. You can be number two, but you can't be number one. There's no such thing as winning global politics. There's no such thing as winning business. But when we listen to far too many leaders, they don't actually know the game in which they're playing. Too many of our leaders talk about being number one, being the best, and beating their competition in games that have no finish lines, games that have no agreed upon metrics, no agreed upon time frames. In other words, when we play with a finite mindset in an infinite game, what we do is we run through the will and the resources that we need to stay in that game. So I had a real life experience that helped me understand the difference between these two different mindsets. I spoke at an education summit for Microsoft. I also spoke at an education summit for Apple. At the Microsoft summit, the vast majority of the executives spent the vast majority of their presentations talking about how to beat Apple. At the Apple summit, 100% of the executives spent 100% of their presentations talking about how to help teachers teach and how to help students learn. One was obsessed with where they were going, the other one was obsessed with beating their competition. Guess which one was in quagmire? Guess which one was racing through the will and resources needed to stay in the game? So at the end of my talk at Microsoft, they gave me a gift. They gave me the new Zune when it was a thing. The Zune was Microsoft's response to the iPod. And this little piece of technology that they gave me was absolutely fantastic. Beautifully designed, simple to use, the user interface was intuitive. It was really a wonderful little piece of technology. So at the end of my Apple talk, I was sharing a taxi with a senior Apple executive, and I couldn't help myself. I had to stir the pot. So I turned to him and I said, you know, Microsoft gave me their new Zune. It is so much better than your iPod Touch. And he looked at me and he said, I have no doubt. And the conversation was over. Because when you're playing with an infinite mindset, you recognize that sometimes you have the better product, and sometimes your competitor has the better product. And there's no such thing as winning, there's only ahead and behind. So this begs the question, if we are to be players in this infinite game, and if we are to be leaders in this infinite game, how do we then adjust our mindset to play for the game that we're actually in? Turns out we need 5 things, 5 practices. Number 1, you have to have a just cause. Number 2, you have to build trusting teams. Number 3, you have to study your worthy rivals. Number 4, you have to have the capacity for existential flexibility. And number 5, you have to have the courage to lead. Number 1, advancing a just cause. My favorite example of a just cause was written down for us over 240 years ago in the Declaration of Independence. Our founding fathers wrote down what they believed was an idealized vision of the future that did not yet exist, and an idealized vision so inspiring that they were willing, as they wrote, to sacrifice their fortunes, their lives, and their honor in order to help advance towards this just cause that we all know, that all men are created equal, endowed with unalienable rights, amongst which include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This was an ideal vision of the future, did not yet exist, and the winning of the Revolutionary War, which was a finite victory, was simply the beginning of this journey that we would go on. It is an infinite journey. We will never actually get to the point where all people are created equal, but we will die trying, and that is the point. And you can see throughout our history where we have attempted to move towards that high standard that our founding fathers set for us. Shortly after the end of the Revolution, we abolished slavery, and then we had women's suffrage, and then we had civil rights and gay rights, and you can see that we're trying getting closer and closer to building this idealized vision. But let's be clear, we will never actually get there, and that's what a just cause is. It's a clearly stated vision of the future in idealized terms that we will commit our organization, our efforts, and our energies to help advance towards that vision. And we have to give people a sense of cause, a sense of purpose to advance towards something. Otherwise, all we have is a series of finite goals. And though those goals may be exciting, they don't give our lives, and they certainly don't give our work meaning. We want to show up every single day to advance something bigger than ourselves. We must give our people a just cause if we are to play in the infinite game. Number 2, build trusting teams. I went on a business trip, and they put me up at the Four Seasons in Las Vegas. It's a beautiful hotel. And the reason it's a beautiful hotel is not because of the people it's not because of the fancy beds, rather. Any hotel can buy fancy beds. The reason it's a wonderful hotel is because of the people who work there. That when you walk through the hallways and somebody says hello to you, you get the distinct feeling that they wanted to say hello, not that they were told to say hello. We're highly attuned social animals. We can tell the difference. It's like you can always tell when someone's working on commission, right? You can feel it, right? They happen to have a coffee bar in the lobby there in the Four Seasons Las Vegas. And so one afternoon, I went and bought myself a cup of coffee. And the barista working that day was a kid named Noah. Noah was funny and engaging and charming. And I stood there for far too long buying a cup of coffee because I just enjoyed talking to Noah. So as is my nature, I asked Noah, "Do you like your job?" And without skipping a beat, Noah said, "I love my job." Now, in my line of work, that's significant. Like is rational. I like the people I work with, I get paid well, I like the challenge, I like my job. Love is emotional. It's a higher order connection. You know, do you love your wife? I like her a lot. Right? It's different. It's different. Noah said, "I love my job." So immediately, my ears perked up. This kid has an emotional connection to his job. So I immediately followed up and said, "Tell me specifically what the Four Seasons is doing that you would say to me you love your job." And without skipping a beat, Noah said, "Throughout the day, managers will walk past me and ask me how I'm doing, ask me if there's anything that I need to do my job better. Not just my manager, any manager." And then he said, "I also work at a different hotel. And there the managers walk past us and catch us when we're doing things wrong. There they're just driving us to make the numbers. I like to just keep my head below the radar, get through the day, and collect my paycheck." He said, "Only at the Four Seasons do I feel I can be myself." And this is what a trusting team is. A trusting team is when we work with people where we feel safe to be ourselves. We all know what it feels like to be on a trusting team. It means we can raise our hands and say, I made a mistake. You've promoted me to a position where I don't know what I'm doing. I need more training. I'm scared. There are issues I'm having at home that are affecting my work. I need help. Without any fear of humiliation or retribution. In fact, we say these things to our bosses or our peers with the absolute confidence that someone will rush in to support us. We all know what it feels like to be on a trusting team. If we do not build trusting teams, if we do not create environments in which trust can thrive, what you get is a group of people who show up to work every single day lying, hiding, and faking. They're hiding mistakes for fear of getting in trouble or losing their jobs. They're never going to admit that they got promoted to a position where they don't know what they're doing. They're never going to admit that they are clueless or need help or are scared or there's suffering overwhelming stress at home that's affecting their work. And so they keep it hidden until eventually things start to crack and eventually things start to break. It's a perfectly fine short-term strategy, lying, hiding, and faking, but it cannot last. We all know what it looks like when we allow a lack of trusting teams, we allow lying, hiding, and faking to progress. Remember, we've also seen that video of the United Airlines passenger who was dragged off the aircraft with a broken nose, broken teeth, and a concussion. I actually feel bad for every member of that crew because every single member of that crew knew that that was a bad thing, and yet none of them intervened. They were more afraid of breaking the rules than they were for doing the right thing. And that was not an anomaly. Though things like that do not happen overnight. That was a slow, steady build to that point. And most organizations will never get to that extreme, but too many organizations are still struggling with the process of moving to that direction. I had a scene play out in front of me years before on United that gave a clue as to what was going to happen in the future. I was waiting to board an aircraft, and one of the passengers attempted to board the plane before their group number was called, which, as everyone here knows, is a felony. And that's exactly how the gate agent treated him. Step aside, sir. I haven't called your group yet. Please step aside and wait till I call your group, is how she talked to a paying customer. So I spoke up. I said, why do you have to talk to us that way? Why can't you talk to us like we're human beings? And she looked me in the eye and said, sir, if I don't follow the rules, I could get in trouble or lose my job. What she revealed to me is that she does not feel safe in her own organization, and her leaders do not trust her to do the job for which she's been trained to do. And guess who suffers? Customer, company, and employee. The reason we love flying Southwest Airlines, for example, is not because they have some magical formula how to hire the best people. It's because the people who work there feel safe in their own jobs, that they feel trusted to do the job for which they've been trained to do. And guess who benefits? Customer, company, and employee. It is a leader's responsibility to create that environment. That environment is not natural. It is man-made. And it is made by leaders. Leadership has nothing to do with rank. I know many people who sit at the highest levels of organizations who are not leaders. We do as they tell us because they have authority over us, but we would not follow them. And yet I know many people who are at low levels of organizations who have no formal rank or authority, and yet they've made a choice, the choice to look after the person to the left of them, and the choice to look after the person to the right of them, and we would trust them and follow them anywhere. That's what leadership is. Leadership is the responsibility to see that those around us will rise. I get this question all the time. Simon, how do we get the most out of our people? People are not a towel. We don't wring them out. It's a flawed question, which means the answers are going to be flawed as well. The correct question to ask is, how do we create an environment in which our people will work to their natural best? And that is the job of leaders. That's what leadership is. It's about creating an environment. When you're junior, you have to be very good at your job. And if you're very good at your job, you'll get promoted, where eventually you get promoted to a position where you're now responsible for the people who do the job you used to do. But so rarely do our organizations teach us how to lead. And this is why we get managers. Because I do know how to do your job better than you. That's what got me promoted. But we have to learn to change. There's a conversion that has to happen. There's no leader that's responsible for the results. We're responsible for the people who are responsible for the results. There's no leader who's responsible for the customer. We're responsible for the people who are responsible for the customer. There's no leader who's responsible for mission success. We're responsible for the people who are responsible for mission success. And this is the hard work of leadership, the thankless, tiresome, sometimes lonely responsibility of leadership. The closest analogy to leadership is like parenting. Every single person on the planet has the capacity to be a parent. Not everyone should be a parent, and not everyone wants to be a parent. Exactly. And leadership is exactly the same. Everyone has the capacity to be a leader. Not everybody should be a leader, and not everybody wants to be a leader. Because like being a parent, it means what we have to do is put our interests aside, very often, to take care of those in our charge. Leadership is not about being in charge, but taking care of those in our charge. And that's what it takes to build trusting teams. And trusting teams are essential
if you want to play in the infinite game. Number 3, study your worthy rivals. So there's another person who does what I do. He writes books, he gives talks, he's extremely well respected, he does extremely good work. I like his work as well. I hate him. It's nothing personal. He's never done anything bad to me. He's always been very polite when I've seen him in professional environments. It's a completely irrational feeling I have towards him. And as a result of my contempt, I'm very competitive with him. I will regularly go online and check my book rankings and then immediately check his. Mind you, I look at nobody else's, just his. And if I'm ahead, I'm really smug. And if I'm behind, I'm really angry. We were invited to speak at the same event. And I don't mean me in the morning, him in the afternoon. I mean we were going to be interviewed together on the same stage. And the interviewer thought it would be fun if we introduced each other. I went first. I looked at him and I said, you make me really insecure. All of your strengths are all of my weaknesses. And when your name comes up, I get really uncomfortable. He looked at me and he said, funny, I feel the same about you. The reason I was so competitive with him had nothing to do with him. It had everything to do with me. And that's what a worthy rival does. Their strengths reveal to us our weaknesses. And it's very hard to take a hard look at ourselves and admit some of those weaknesses and be willing to work on them. It is much easier to take that uncomfortable energy and direct it at someone. And look how often we do this at work or as organizations or as individuals. We pick other organizations to beat. There's no winning in the infinite game. There's no finish line. There's only ahead and behind. There is no beating them. Or we've all had this experience where somebody that we work with got a promotion and we got angry. Think about that for a second. What is it about them that produced anger inside us? Why couldn't we have joy for somebody else's good fortune? What weakness are they revealing in us? And where competitors are there to be beaten in a finite game, there are no competitors in an infinite game. We have only rivals. And some of those rivals are worthy of comparison. You get to choose your own worthy rivals, both as individuals and as organizations. Choose wisely. There's no point choosing someone or an organization that you're always ahead of, because then you're just going to be smug or continue to have all the blind spots. There are other organizations out there who are better at what you do. They may be better at marketing. They may have a clearer sense of just cause, a clear set of vision. They may have better leadership training. Or as individuals, there may be people who are more strategic, better public speakers. They may have more confidence. What is it about them that we can learn to admire and respect? We don't have to like them. We don't have to agree with them. But we do have to respect them, because their strengths reveal to us our weaknesses. And in this game, this infinite game that has no finish line, the primary goal in the infinite game is constant improvement. Which is why we're grateful for our worthy rivals, because they give us the ability to constantly improve. Know who your worthy rivals are. Study them, learn from them, and improve yourself. The fourth practice is a capacity for existential flexibility. This one's a doozy. So the best example of it, I think, comes from Apple. In 1979, December of 1979, Steve Jobs and a few of his senior executives visited Xerox PARC. Now, by this point, Apple was already a big company. They already had success from the Apple I and the Apple II. Jobs was already a famous CEO. And Xerox showed them something they invented called the graphic user interface. Now, you have to understand, Jobs had a clear sense of just cause. He wanted to create a world in which individuals could stand up to Big Brother. He imagined a day in which an individual could actually compete with a corporation, which is why he was so enamored by the personal computer, because he saw it as a tool that empowered individuals, right? That was his vision. That's why everything's I this and I that. It's not because it's digital, it's because it puts an individual front and center. He was obsessed with individuals standing up to Big Brother, the rebellious spirit, right? So here he is, they've had the success from the Apple I, the Apple II, and Xerox shows them this graphic user interface, which allows people to use computers by moving a mouse, which moves a cursor on a desktop, and you could click on folders and icons to work the computer. You didn't have to learn a computer language anymore. Jobs sees this innovation as a leapfrog to helping him advance his just cause. After they leave Xerox, he says to the executives who went on the tour with him, we have to invest in this graphic user interface thing. One of the executives, the voice of reason, I guess, said to him, Steve, we can't. We've already invested millions of dollars and countless man-hours in a completely different strategic direction. If we invest in this thing, we will blow up our own company. We can't just walk away from the millions of dollars and countless man-hours we've already spent. To which Jobs actually said, better we should blow it up than someone else. That decision led to the Macintosh, a computer operating system so profound that the entire software of Windows is designed to act like a Macintosh. The reason a computer is a household appliance, the reason there's a computer on every single desk, was because of his willingness to walk away from that investment. And that's what existential flexibility is. It's the willingness to make a profound, sometimes 180-degree strategic shift because you find a better way to advance your cause. It's not the daily flexibilities that are just required in normal life. This is an upheaval. This is why I call it a capacity, because there's a prerequisite before you have this capacity. Number one, you better have a just cause that's crystal clear to you and everybody in the organization, because they have to understand the context why you would completely disrupt the whole organization and say, this is going to suck, but we have to do this. And number two, you better have trusting teams, because it is going to suck, and there's going to be a few years of pain, and if they don't trust each other and take care of each other, it's going to collapse, because you're going to put the organization through short-term hell. So unless you have a just cause and trusting teams, do not do this. But you have to have the capacity for existential flexibility, because the world changes, politics change, culture changes, technology changes. And we've seen what happens when organizations do not have a capacity for existential flexibility. They're just playing defense the whole time. So look what happened in publishing. Why is it that Amazon invented itself and the digital e-reader, the Kindle? Why not the publishing industry? It's because they doubled down on protecting their old business model in the face of changing technology. They wanted to print more books. They never imagined trying to advance helping people read more or learn more, in which case they would have invented the digital e-reader. Now they're playing defense. Why is it that Netflix invented itself and not the movie and television industry? Why is it that Apple invented iTunes and not the music industry? The invention of the MP3 should have showed them that maybe we're not in an album culture anymore. Maybe we're in a portable song culture. But they refused to change. And now they're all playing defense, and most of them have gone out of business. One of the funnier stories, do you remember Blockbuster? Blockbuster was the 800-pound gorilla. It was the only significant national video rental chain. And this little company called Netflix showed up. And Netflix was experimenting with a new kind of business model called subscription, where if you remember, you would subscribe and they would send you the DVDs, and you could keep them as long as you wanted and send them back when you were done. And we knew streaming was coming because the technology existed. It wasn't good enough yet, but it was on the horizon. We all knew it was there. And Netflix was experimenting with a model that would prepare them for that new technology. The CEO of Blockbuster saw this, went into the board and said, we have to explore subscription models. And the board would not allow him to change the business model. Do you want to know why? Because they made 12% of their revenues from late fees. And now Blockbuster doesn't exist, and Netflix dominates television and the movie industry, has redefined it altogether. That's what happens when you don't have existential flexibility. Because if you're not willing to blow up your company, the market will blow it up for you. Number 5, the courage to lead. Everything that I've talked about today is unbelievably difficult. It is very difficult to be cause-driven and make decisions to advance a just cause. It is much easier to be goal-driven. It is much easier to just keep setting arbitrary goals and arbitrary timelines and driving our people to hit those goals. It's easier. It doesn't last. It creates unbelievable mistrust inside an organization over time. Over time, it destroys cultures and makes it pretty awful to go to work. But it's easier, and it works great in the short term. It is hard to be cause-driven. It is hard to make sacrifices to advance a cause, especially when those sacrifices are financial in an organization that prioritizes money. It is difficult to build trusting teams. It is much easier to just hire and fire people willy-nilly, as opposed to investing the time in coaching people and helping them grow. Ugh. Worthy rivalry? Competition's way more fun, way more exciting. Who wants to look at our weaknesses and have to work on ourselves? And existential flexibility can literally completely uproot the entire organization. The courage to lead is what's required. Where we work in a world today where the definition of business has been defined as to maximize profit within the bounds of the law, what about ethics? This is a terrible definition of business, and it has not always been this way. This definition of business was written down in the 1970s, and many of the current business practices that we suffer through today have not always been that way. They're as a result of embracing that definition. The concept of using mass layoffs on a regular basis to balance the books did not exist in the United States prior to the 1980s, did not exist. It was popularized in the 80s and 90s by leaders like Jack Welch, the CEO of GE, and those like him. The concept of shareholder supremacy, where we prioritize shareholder value over customers or employees, did not exist in the United States. It was a theory proposed in the late 1970s, popularized in the boom years of the 80s and 90s. These are modern concepts. They are finite thinking, and arguably, they are not working. After the Great Depression in the 1920s, Congress passed a law called the, what was it called? Total mind blank. No, not the New Deal. No, it'll come back to me, don't worry. What the hell was it called? Anyway, they passed legislation to prevent another Great Depression from happening. Was that? No, not Sarbanes-Oxley. That's recent. It's okay. We'll figure it out. No, let's just move on. Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The human brain at its best. They passed the Glass-Steagall Act after the Great Depression to prevent another Great Depression from happening. It included things like making it illegal for a single bank to both be an investment bank and a commercial bank, amongst many other things, including over-speculating and things like that. This law was largely dismantled in the 80s and 90s in the name of corporate profit. Right? Do you know how many stock market crashes we had between the Great Depression and when the Glass-Steagall Act was dismantled? Zero. We had zero. And since we've dismantled that regulation, we had 1987, we had the dot-com boom, and we had 2008, all man-made. Because finite thinking has taken control of American business to our detriment. It's harder and harder to enjoy our work more. We are not loyal to companies, mainly because companies aren't loyal to us. I'm tired of listening to executives saying, millennials aren't loyal. Well, if you keep laying them off every year when you miss your arbitrary deadlines, why should they be loyal to you? Let them go find better work. What we had in the United States is a failure of leadership. We have a leadership crisis across every domain: politics, business, hospitals, education. Look at many of the universities that we attend. They're run by people who are chosen for their jobs for their ability to fundraise, not because of their ability to produce great educational organizations that prepare our students to lead for the future. If anybody understands the value of good leadership, it's the people in this room. The reason I talk about and the reason I write about military so much is not because military has better leadership. You've got some bad leadership and good leadership in the military. There's plenty to go around. But when the stakes are life and death, everything kind of works really well. The sister forces don't really get along so well in Washington, Put them in a combat situation, they get along great. Joint really works in those situations. Go to any FOB in any war zone, in any AOR, and you'll see people who are willing to sacrifice their lives to take care of their brothers and sisters, people they don't even necessarily like. And this is what I love about the military. In private sector, we have colleagues and coworkers. You have brothers and sisters. That's what leadership is. And this is what we need more of in our country, the courage to lead, the courage to sacrifice our short-term interests in order to advance a cause greater than ourselves, in order to take care of the person to the left of me, in order to take care of the person to the right of me. It's just a choice. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.